I'm going to go ahead and call to order this meeting, or of the special planning board meeting of January 21st, 2021. Can I get a roll call first, please?
Sure. Mayor Donchis? Mike Peterson?
Here and alone.
Scott Leclaire?
Here and alone.
Adam Varley? I do see him up on the screen, his name.
Yep.
Maggie Harper?
Here and alone.
David Tenza? Jan Schmidt? Dan Hudson? Ed Weber?
Here and alone.
Bob Bollinger?
Here and alone.
And Larry Hirsch? Okay, and we have a quorum.
Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and go through the procedure of the meeting first. So again, my name is Scott Leclaire. I'm the chair of the City of Nashua Planning Board, and this is again the 21st of January 2021 special planning board meeting. As chair of the planning board, I filed due to the state of emergency declared by Governor Sununu as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12 pursuant to executive order 2020-04. This public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note there's no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized to meet electronically pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that 1, we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possibilities by video or other electronic means. We're video conferencing utilizing Zoom, and public access to this meeting is provided via Zoom, and a link to the meeting is contained in the meeting agenda available on the city's website. The meeting can also be streamed through the city's website at www.nashuanh.gov/318/CTV on Nashua's community link. Number 2, we're providing public notice of necessary information for accessing the meeting. If anyone has any problem accessing the meeting, please call 603-589-3115 and they will be able to help you connect. Lastly, in any event, if the public is unable to access the meeting via the methods mentioned above, the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. I'm in control of the meeting, and to the extent practical and advisable, the board will follow the procedures as identified in its bylaws. Applicants will present their applicant's case, followed by questions by the board. Will allow for a rebuttal period as best as possible for persons wishing to speak in favor or with questions or oppositions before the board deliberates and determines an outcome. Applicants, their representatives, and individuals required to appear before the board are appearing remotely and not required to be physically present. Applicants, their representatives, and individuals required to appear before the board may contact the planning department to arrange an alternative means of real-time participation if unable to use Zoom. Please note all votes taken during this meeting will be done by a roll call vote, and all planning board meetings will continue to be held electronically until it's been deemed safe to conduct more typical meetings at City Hall. The board, the planning department, and the city thank everybody for their understanding and patience during this time. Okay, so first up on the agenda, we don't have any minutes since this is a special board meeting. Is there any communications that we need to talk about, or are we solid on that?
The only thing is everybody should have received a packet in the mail from Matt.
Right.
Other than that, there's nothing else.
Okay, thanks. Assuming we have no reports at this point, that'd be either Ed or Maggie from committees.
Nothing to report.
Nothing to report.
Great. Okay, so moving into our agenda, again, we have no old business and no new business on this special planning meeting. We only have other business, and other business number 1 is a referral from the Board of Aldermen on the proposed resolution R-21-109, authorizing issuing of building permits on Old Harris Road, a Class 6 highway. So do we have anybody who wants to present that? And I guess before we do that, I noticed Larry has joined us. Could you got that, Linda, on the
Yes.
roll? Okay, great.
Here and alone.
Yeah, here and alone. Okay. Somebody want to present the referral?
Yes, Mr. Chair. My name is Matt Sullivan, Planning Manager for the City of Nashua, and I'm going to quickly walk the board through this referral item coming from the Board of Aldermen related to the issuance of building permits on a Class 6 road, that being Old Harris Road. In this situation, the board is fairly familiar with this request in that the basis of the request was actually a condition of approval that was put in place by the Planning Board back on November 5th of 2020 as part of the approval for the Pennachuck solar array on Old Harris Road. The condition of approval that I'm referring to specifically was the requirement for an issuance of a letter from the applicant's attorney documenting the status of Old Harris Road, and then subsequently favorable review both by the Division of Public Works, the Planning Department, and Corporation Counsel. What transpired after that is that Frasca and Frasca generated a legal opinion, submitted that to the Corporation Counsel for their review, and as part of internal conversations and certainly the letter's finding, we came to the conclusion that Old Harris Road is in fact a Class 6 road under state statute. The implication of that is that under RSA 674-41, building permits on Class 6 roads, unless already shown on a plotted subdivision plan approved by the Planning Board, or in other specific cases, they actually require that the Board of Aldermen authorize the issuance of the building permit on that road. And again, that's just in the instance of Class 6 and certain private roads. The idea here obviously is that any development on a Class 6 road may ultimately be scattered or premature. It may create unexpected liability for the community. And certainly from a fire, police, and other services perspective, it may have an impact on community services and the provision of those services. So that authority has been placed with the Board of Aldermen. In the context of sort of the scatter and premature development, the idea is that as part of the aldermanic process, the Planning Board are actually asked to weigh in on just those factors, whether or not there'll be an impact on services, whether the development is scattered or premature, and of course, sort of at more basic level, whether or not there's proper access and suitable access to the site that can be maintained for the proposed activity. This is a somewhat unique application in the sense that, or unique request in the sense that the board has just reviewed this in the last months. You actually reviewed the access as part of the site plan application. And even more unique is that the road condition is actually quite good in this case. It was favorably reviewed both by the fire department and the Division of Public Works as part of that process. That, I think, makes this evening's proceedings relatively straightforward in that there's been a clear demonstration that the development is appropriate for the area via the Planning Board's approval, and that both of the really the critical departments have already weighed in on the development and the compatibility of the development with the existing infrastructure that exists in that area. That said, I did want to be available for the board to ask any questions about this request and just to lead a discussion, hopefully, of whether or not the Planning Board will support this request to authorize the building permit issuance for the construction of this solar array. In the end, I have recommended a motion within the memo that I've provided to you that I'd like you to consider, but I'm happy to lead a discussion about whether or not the access is adequate, if there are any concerns from the board, and certainly those concerns could be integrated into a motion if the board finds it appropriate. And just one last point of clarification, it is a bit odd that solar panels do require a building permit in sort of to some extent, but they do require electrical, other mechanical permitting as part of that process. So that's why that RSA 674-41 is triggered here, and that's why it must go through this process. So that being said, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board has. I do have the plans available if you'd like to take a look at them, but the entirety of Old Harris Road as shown on that plan is in fact a Class 6 road and therefore subject to this process.
Okay, thanks. I guess the only question I had, Matt, was just to clarify. So when I look at the information that was sent along, there's some sort of historical kind of drawings or plats of, subdivisions or intended subdivisions along the way. I assume, or am I correct in saying that the subdivision as it was presented to us the last time when we essentially approved this with stipulations remains accurate? There wasn't any kind of findings in that discovery, if you will?
That's correct. I thought you were going in a different direction with that question, but that's correct.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things is, and this is pretty common in the state of New Hampshire, is that there were lots of historical documents included there, all of which are technically subdivisions of land, but they predated the planning board's authority to approve plats in the community. And that's why they aren't exempt from this process. That's why they have to come back to the board for review. But Scott, to your question, no, nothing is invalidated from that. The applicant still intends to merge the lots as they had proposed when they came to you and consolidate the existing paper streets and lots that are there. But even so, it is required to go through this process.
Yeah.
But no other changes have been proposed.
Yeah, that was my only question. Anybody from the board have any other questions for staff on this referral? Mr. Bollinger?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess first comment or question, I believe within the fire department recommendations, they wanted to maintain at least 20-foot minimum width. And are you able to comment, Mr. Sullivan, on the existing width, whether it's paved or unpaved, or whether or not it would satisfy the general requirements of the fire department as it exists, or whether improvements would be necessary?
Yes, I can. The only question I can't answer, Mr. Bollinger, is what the existing width is. But I do know that the existing surface is a gravel surface. The road has been well maintained over time. And you may see that within that email chain with the fire department, they certified that the existing condition as is suitable for what their expectations are. And further, you may notice that in the agreement and release document that will be required to be recorded at the Registry of Deeds, there is a specific requirement that the applicant, or the owner in this case, will be required to provide that 20-foot free and clear access in perpetuity. So in the event that there are any issues as a result of construction, or there's any damage to the road, the owner ultimately bears the responsibility of restoring the road to the proper condition. But fire did certify the existing road is adequate for access as is, despite the lack of a turnaround, and despite the fact that it's a gravel road.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Chair, may I ask a couple of other questions,
Sure.
if that's okay?
Yep.
Thank you. I just, Mr. Sullivan, with regard to Class 6 roads in general, if you get into the weeds of the RSAs, there's a number of statements concerning gates and bars, and if basically, it's still Class 6, it is a public roadway. It's a public right-of-way, at least. Could you comment on the gates and bars access, and whether or not
Sure.
the existing gate towards, I guess, the main road there needs to be maintained, and who would actually have access? And I guess maybe the follow-up to that question, if I'm recalling the testimony correct from the November hearing, there is still at least one or two privately owned parcels that are not associated with Pennachuck there. They either didn't want to sell, or they couldn't come to terms. And I guess I just want to ensure that those owners, or even the general public, again, it's a public way, still has access to walking or biking, or to utilize to the full extent the availability of the public way.
Yeah, it's a great set of questions. And the first comment, or I guess the first response I would offer, is that the existing gate as is not locked. So my understanding is it's compliant, obviously, with the gates and bars provisions of the Class 6 road statute. There are no modifications to that gate, as I understand it, proposed as part of this project, and nor did the owner propose any. And as you're saying, because it's a public road, they quite frankly couldn't, without consent of the city itself. There are no modifications proposed to that at all. Any gating that will happen within the private property owner's property boundaries, and I expect that they will gate the fence that was proposed as part of the site plan review that you approved back in November. But there will be no gates controlled by the private property owner within the public right-of-way portion, that Class 6 portion. That said, I guess the key response is there are no modifications proposed to the existing condition as far as gates and bars go, Mr. Bollinger.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Chair, I just have one other question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan, it's strictly a hypothetical, and it doesn't directly apply. But if at some point in the future, if there was a petition of some sort to convert Class 6 to a private driveway, what process would this applicant or any applicant have to do to convert that to a private driveway? Would that similarly go through the Board of Aldermen, or is there some other process or mechanism by which that would occur?
Yeah, Mr. Bollinger, another good question, and I'm going to respond with an educated but maybe not 100% certain response.
That's okay. That's okay.
Just because I'm not familiar with that process here in the city intimately, but it would be a discontinuance process, obviously, much like I was part of the process down by the Tully project that you heard several months ago. The property owner does maintain an easement over that land. Over the public right-of-way right now. Even it's a public street, but my understanding is there's actually an easement in place there as well. So in the event that it were to be converted to a private street, I believe it would go through the discontinuance process via the alderman, but the property owner would maintain their access over the land essentially and to the property. So there would be a lot of steps that would have to happen there, but ultimately it would be an aldermanic process, but the owner, I believe, would maintain access.
Okay. And I appreciate that. And part of the reason why I asked, and again, I'm not insinuating that would happen or that's, going to happen anytime soon. I believe that Pennachuck Middle School actually has an easement over part of Old Harris Road via the connection at Manchester Street. And I would just want to ensure that if that ever did come to fruition at some point, that obviously the student population or whoever utilized Pennachuck Middle School wouldn't be affected by the fact that potentially could convert to a private drive rather than a public way.
Yeah, and I think like this owner in front of us for the building permit this evening, I think any property owner adjacent with a vested access interest over the existing Class 6 road would have to be part of a larger conversation should any discontinuance be considered at a later point in time.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks. Other questions by the board for staff? Okay, hearing none. I'm not sure if we have any public sending in, have any comments, questions. At this point, I'd take any, if there are. Again, I would need someone to unmute, state your name and address for record. Okay, not hearing any. All right, so as this is just a referral, so the board just essentially is free to discuss this amongst ourselves, and then someone would ultimately be encouraged to produce a motion as to whether we want to give a positive or recommendation or have some conditions or other concerns. So anybody have any comments they want to make regarding this referral?
Mr. Chair, just my only comment, just a procedural one. I think Mr. Sullivan indicated that he had some suggested language for a motion just before we get to that point.
Okay, great. So we'll definitely get that. Thanks. Anybody else? Any comments, questions? If not, Matt, do you have some recommended language?
Mr. Chair, I do. I included recommended language on what I believe is page 5 of what I had passed along. And what I'll do is I'll read it right now. And then if someone would like to make a motion, you're welcome to do that. But should the board choose to proceed, what I would recommend is a motion to recommend approval of resolution R21-109, authorizing the issuance of a building permit for the construction of the Pennachuck solar array with sole access via Old Harris Road, a Class 6 road pursuant to RSA 674-41. As shown on the plans approved by the Planning Board on November 5th, 2020, and as amended to the date of that approval. The board finds that there is no anticipated impact to city services, that the proposal does not encourage scattered and premature development, and conditions the recommendation upon the requirement that a release of municipal liability and responsibility be signed by the owner requesting a building permit on Old Harris Road, with such release to be recorded at the Hillsborough County Registry of Deeds by the owner prior to the issuance of a building permit. I know that's a mouthful, but I think I just wanted to cover everything within that.
Okay, thanks. So at this point, I guess anybody from the board, obviously you can, that's all on the record. So if you want to use the language, you can use the language. So, but if you want to modify it, please feel free to do so. Anybody want to make a motion? Mr. Bollinger?
Actually, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to concur with the language because I think the liability component is a big one. I think under RSA, if the city were to undertake any sort of improvement of a Class 6 road, then I think that the city is ultimately culpable from a liability standpoint. But if there's any maintenance issues or associated with the driveway access, that's incumbent on the applicant. So I just wanted to chime in and state that I think that's reasonable. And my limited experience with Class 6 roads is that this would be consistent with other things that I've seen in the past. But the liability issue, I think is a key one for the city.
Okay. Anybody want to make a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion.
Go ahead, Mr.
Ready for
Riley.
Okay. So again, just taking into account what Mr. Sullivan suggested, I will make a motion to recommend approval of resolution R-21-109, authorizing the issuance of a building permit for the construction of the Penachuk Solar Array with the sole access via Old Harris Road, a Class 6 road pursuant to RSA 674-41, as shown on the plans approved by the Planning Board on November 5th, 2020, as amended to the date of that approval. The board finds that there is no anticipated impact to city services. The proposal does not encourage scattered and premature development. And the board conditions the recommendation upon the requirement that a release of municipal liability and responsibility be signed by any owner requesting a building permit on Old Harris Road, with such release to be recorded at the Hillsborough County Registry of Deeds by the owner prior to the issuance of any building permit.
Okay, so we have that motion to recommend approval as stated by Mr. Varley. Do we have a second on that?
Second,
Okay.
Second by
Peterson.
Mr. Peterson.
third,
Got it? Any further discussion? All right, let's get a roll vote on that, please.
Mike Peterson,
yes.
Scott Leclaire,
Yes.
Adam Varley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Bollinger,
Yes.
Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
That motion passes 7-0.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I believe that is all we have on our agenda. Anybody have any other items that they want to discuss at this point? Okay, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
So motion by Mr. Weber to adjourn. Can we get a roll vote on that?
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclaire,
Yes.
Adam Varley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Bollinger,
Yes.
Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
That motion passes 8-0.
Okay, and we are adjourned at 7:24.